Well, thanks very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now by Rushanara Ali, who's a Labour MP, was on the Treasury Select Committee, and by Conservative MP Damien Green, the former de facto Deputy Prime Minister. Good evening to both of you. You heard Paul Johnson there, Damien Green. You are passionate about education. Where is there going to be the evidence tomorrow that education, as we're saying, key to levelling up, is going to be serviced properly?
Well, I would hope that clearly the Chancellor will have left some rabbits in his budget box.
He wanted to put another one out tonight, probably before Lindsay Hoyle was on his case.
Well, so there may be more than one. I mean, there'll clearly be a raft of announcements tomorrow, and as well as tax rates and so on. On education, I'm particularly looking forward to something on skills, vocational education, further education, that sort of area. Not only for all the things Paul Johnson was saying, which I agree with, that it's very important for levelling up, but it's absolutely crucial for productivity. And the high wage economy that the Prime Minister absolutely rightly wants is sustainable if we increase our productivity.
Yeah, and productivity is key because it's key to killing inflation and everything else, the problems that we have there. One particular area of education in England has been a real red flag, and that has been in mental health services and provisions for children coming in to have counselling and so forth. The CAM service has been inundated. I mean, there are real fears there, aren't there, that that service itself needs a lot more money.
Yeah, and indeed, I mean, as you've just been discussing, the health service has got a lot more money. The government has been quite appropriately generous to it, and I think the interface with that and education is extremely important.
Rushanara Ali, Labour presumably welcomes the end of the freeze on public sector pay and the rising of the living and the rise in the living wage. I mean, that's exactly presumably what a Labour government would have done.
Look, the challenge here is that what we've had is over a decade of austerity, and what the government is doing now is taking money from people's pockets, including £1,000 through universal credit, increasing taxes, and then when you add up what they're offering back to our constituents, it's about £250. So they are basically, in effect, making people worse off, because when you look at the combination of the tax burden and what's being taken away, it's not in reality a situation where people are going to be better off. And let's remember that this country has faced a number of shocks. COVID, the economic impact of COVID, but also Brexit. So the long-term impact on our economy requires a really seismic shift in what our government does. And we've just that ambition in what they're proposing.
Well, the accusation is, of course, the government has actually been stealing some of Labour's clothes. So what would you be spending more on right now? And not only that, where would you find the money for it?
Well, what we need to do is make sure those who have suffered the most are protected, and that's not happening. We would not scrap universal credit. We would provide VAT cuts for those who are going to face massive challenges with bills, with the cost of living crisis. We would be investing in education, in higher education, in technical skills. We need to make sure we deal with the economic challenges facing us. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to rebuild our economy.
But how would you pay for that? I mean, we have low productivity. That's not going to be fixed in a day. Would you raise taxes?
What we've had is a government that's borrowed a significant amount. They're taxing in the wrong places. I believe that we should ensure those who can bear greatest cost in terms of paying back should do so. What we've got is a government that's basically introduced national insurance that's going to be a burden on workers, on people who have worked incredibly hard in the public services as well in the NHS.
The cost of borrowing is going up. Would you keep borrowing to pay for it? Would that be Labour's position? We'll just keep borrowing?
Grow our way out of this crisis. And historically, what we've seen after the global financial crisis is this government went for austerity. At the moment, we're getting a bit of a mix and match, not a radical plan for rebuilding our economy, revitalising our economy, investing in innovation and technology. The government talks a lot about being a science superpower and trading with other countries.
Well, let's just bring this back to Damien Green. I mean, Rushanara Ali is right, is that people are not, lower paid people are not going to be substantially better off, despite despite the rise of the living wage to £9.50, despite the idea that there's not longer a freeze on public sector workers?
I mean, the fundamental problem with Rushanara's and the Labour analysis is they're still attacking austerity from 2010. Nobody can accuse this government of imposing austerity over the last 2 years. We've gone through a pandemic. We've spent £400 billion of taxpayers' money hugely successfully with things like the furlough scheme, which means that we're coming out of this pandemic with employment at half the level people were predicting.
Yes.
That's why we can talk about the Chancellor actually making more capital spending.
But I suppose when you look at the imposition on local authorities and local authority services and things like cultural services, libraries and so forth, that is very much part of the levelling up agenda too. These are the things that people need to live a full life, and local authorities are struggling.
The two biggest things that I think are needed for successful levelling up are in health and education. They are the big spending departments. We've talked about education. We've talked
we
about
also
health.
talked about the fact that the catch-up scheme, instead of 15 billion, the first tranche was 1.3 billion.
Yeah,
and the Tsar resigned because it was such a low amount of money.
Yes, but I mean, one should never measure virtue by the amount of taxpayers' money you spend. You actually have to see what you're getting for it. And that's why I think you should narrowly concentrate at this moment very much on vocational skills, things that this country hasn't done particularly well for about 50 years. I think that will be a genuine revolution if we get that.
Rushanara, would you like to see the books balanced by 2024, the fiscal rules? Is that a prudent thing to do?
This government has initiated record debt and record taxes, and they've also wasted a huge amount of public money on dodgy contracts during this pandemic. What we need is much more efficient use of public money. We need much more accountability on how money is spent, and we need to ensure we rebuild our public services and we genuinely tackle the inequalities that face this country. We entered into this pandemic with a very unequal society, and this government has learnt nothing from what's happened in our country.
Do you think we're going to get something in the cost of living, Damien Green?
We may do. I think I'm hoping we'll get something on universal credit, for example, particularly reducing the taper, reducing the amount that's taken away, because we know we've got 1.2 million vacancies. It is surprisingly easy for people to find jobs. I think people in work should be allowed to keep more of what they earn, and reducing the taper would be a good way of doing that.
And any rabbits in terms of tax?
Maybe. I think it's possible. We've heard talk of changing taxes on alcohol to help what is a fast-growing industry in this country, not just beer, the traditional industry, but wine as well.
And finally, if people don't feel better off by the end of tomorrow, or the possibility of being better off, will the budget then have been a failure?
No, I think because what happens tomorrow, I mean, people won't feel better or worse off by tomorrow. What happens over the next 2 or 3 years to the economy, to jobs, as well as to how well off people feel, that's how you measure a budget.
Thank you both very much. Well, Rishi Sunak